Something woke up Scott Kelly at 2 in the morning, 250 miles above the Atlantic Ocean. Not an alarm, not his crewmate. Something that was not supposed to be there. He lay still in his sleeping bag, velcroed to the wall of the International Space Station, listening. It came again. A low, rhythmic vibration traveling through the hull, steady enough to count, impossible to place. He had spent over 300 days in space before that night. He knew what the station sounded like, the way you know the sounds of a house you have lived in for years. This was not one of those sounds. And for 3 minutes in the middle of the night, 250 miles above Earth, Scott Kelly could not explain what was making it. That moment is not classified. It is not secret. It is just one of the hundreds of unexplained acoustic events that have occurred aboard spacecraft since humans first left the atmosphere, and it is almost never talked about. This is the complete story of the sounds that space does not let astronauts explain. And why, as we prepare to send people to Mars, this might be the most important chapter in human spaceflight that nobody is reading. Before the first human being ever reached orbit, physicists established a fact that seems straightforward. Space is silent. No medium, no vibration, no sound. That fact is correct for the vacuum. It is completely wrong for everything. Inside the vacuum, a spacecraft is a pressurized metal shell surrounded by nothing. Every pump, every valve, every fan, every mechanism that keeps the crew alive runs inside that shell, and every one of them vibrates. Those vibrations travel through the structure at the speed of sound in metal, which is roughly 15 times faster than the speed of sound in air. What hits the crew module wall from inside reaches the far end of the spacecraft almost instantly. Now add the external forces, thermal cycling, micrometeoroid impacts, orbital maneuvering engine firings, the drag of residual atmospheric molecules at the edge of the thermosphere. All of these create vibrations. All of those vibrations travel through the hull and become sound inside the pressurized volume. Every astronaut who has ever lived aboard the International Space Station has spent months learning to read that sound. The station produces approximately 60 decibels of continuous background noise, roughly the level of a busy office. Inside that noise, a trained ear can detect anomalies. An anomaly is any sound that does not match the established library of normal. And the International Space Station, over its 25-year occupied history, has produced more documented anomalies than any other human-made structure ever built. The International Space Station is the largest structure humans have ever assembled in orbit. It spans 109 meters from end to end, roughly the length of an American football field. Its pressurized volume is about 915 cubic meters, comparable to a 6-bedroom house. It was built in pieces. 15 countries contributed modules, trusses, solar arrays, and connectors that were launched separately and mated in orbit over more than a decade. Each of those pieces was built by a different manufacturer, to different tolerances, in different countries. They were designed to fit together. They were not designed to be acoustically identical. The result is a structure that has what engineers call acoustic eigenfrequencies, natural resonance points where the geometry of the station amplifies certain frequencies the way a guitar body amplifies the vibration of a plucked string. When a mechanical event aboard the station hits one of those frequencies, the entire structure rings. Not metaphorically, physically. A pump activation in the Russian segment can produce a vibration that travels through the connecting nodes and arrives in the American laboratory module as an audible tone that appears to come from the wall directly next to whoever happens to be working there. Station crews have documented this for over 2 decades. The official term in NASA's anomaly logs is structural resonance transmission. The unofficial term, used by multiple astronauts in interviews, is the station talking. It talks most loudly at 2 specific moments: when it passes from the sunlit side of Earth into shadow, and when it passes back out. Every 45 minutes in each direction, the station's metal structure swings through a temperature range of roughly 280 degrees Celsius. That swing happens quickly enough at orbital velocity that the metal does not have time to expand and contract slowly. It moves in sudden microscopic steps. Each step releases a tiny pulse of stored mechanical energy. Inside the pressurized modules, that pulse sounds like a tap, A pop, a click, or occasionally a sharp crack. The first time a new crew member hears the station crack in the night, every account agrees on what happens. They freeze, their heart rate spikes, their brain does exactly what 200,000 years of evolution trained it to do when something in the dark makes a sudden noise. By week 3, most of them stop noticing, but the sounds do not stop. In the summer of 2013, the 6-person crew of Expedition 36 reported a sound that took Mission Control 2 weeks to explain. And the explanation, when it came, satisfied the engineers more than it satisfied the crew. The sound appeared first to Karen Nyberg, an American flight engineer working in the Harmony module. She described it as a low, intermittent hum with a periodicity of roughly 4 to 6 seconds. Steady enough to seem intentional, quiet enough that she initially thought she was imagining it. She mentioned it to her crewmate Luca Parmitano, who confirmed he had heard something similar in the same location 2 days earlier, but had filed it under normal station noise. That confirmation was the moment it crossed from individual perception to documented anomaly. Mission Control ran checks on every mechanical system in and around the Harmony module. Pumps, fans, water separators, the common berthing mechanisms. Nothing matched the described frequency. They checked the external thermal radiators routed along that section of the truss. The coolant flow rate in those loops runs at a frequency that under certain conditions can couple into the structural members and produce exactly the kind of tone Nyberg described. It was the most likely explanation and was formally logged as the probable cause. The crew was briefed and the anomaly file was closed. Karen Nyberg, in a recorded interview years after her mission, was asked about that sound specifically. She said the explanation made sense mechanically. Then she paused and said she was not certain the explanation matched the sound she actually heard. That pause is worth more than the official file. It captures exactly the gap that defines the auditory experience of long-duration spaceflight. The gap between what the engineering says must have happened and what the human being inside the structure actually perceived. To understand why unexplained sounds have an outsized psychological effect on astronauts, you have to understand what the body does when it is isolated. Human beings evolved in an environment full of meaningful acoustic information. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of something alive. Every sound in our evolutionary environment was potentially informative. The brain is wired to extract meaning from acoustic patterns even when meaning is not there. This is called apophenia in its cognitive form and pareidolia in its visual form. In sound, researchers call it audio-pareidolia, the tendency to hear patterns, rhythms, and even voices in random or ambiguous noise. Astronauts on long-duration missions experience a measurable increase in audio-pareidolia. Studies from analog environments, including Antarctic overwinter stations and submarine deployments, confirm that the longer a person lives in acoustic isolation, the more their auditory system begins to generate its own signal. The brain does not like quiet. In environments with low acoustic variety, it compensates by becoming more sensitive to the sounds that do exist, which is why a thermal pop that would be completely ignored in a busy ground facility can feel, at 2 in the morning in the sleeping quarters of the ISS, like a deliberate knock. NASA's Human Research Program has documented this since the early shuttle era. The official recommendation is sleep mitigation through earplugs and white noise devices. The unofficial reality, reported by astronaut after astronaut in post-mission interviews, is that you get used to most of it. And the ones you do not get used to are the ones that eventually get reported to Mission Control. In September 2019, a specific sound aboard the ISS was not explained. It was followed by something more serious. Station crew detected an anomalous pressure reading, a slow, gradual decline in cabin pressure that pointed to a leak somewhere in the structure. A leak in a spacecraft is not a slow-building concern. It is an immediate threat to crew survival. The crew began isolating modules one by one, closing hatches and monitoring pressure in each sealed section to triangulate the source. The process took hours. The source was eventually found in the Russian Soyuz MS-09 capsule, docked to the station. A small hole, roughly 2 millimeters across, had been discovered in the orbital module of the Soyuz. The cause was debated publicly for months afterward. The official Russian investigation cited manufacturing defect. The hole had been there, in various accounts, since before launch. What is less frequently discussed is what crew members reported in the hours before the pressure anomaly was formally registered. 2 crew members, in separate post-mission accounts, mentioned hearing an unusual sound in the vicinity of the Russian segment in the days prior to the alert. A subtle, intermittent hiss that they each individually filed under thermal noise and did not report. Not because they were negligent, because the sound fell within the range of normal station acoustics based on their established library of what the station sounds like. The hiss was air escaping through a 2-millimeter hole. The station was quite literally telling them something was wrong, and the signal was too quiet and too familiar sounding to be distinguished from background. This is the version of the unexplained sound problem that engineers lose sleep over, not the dramatic knocking that makes an astronaut freeze. The quiet hiss that sounds like everything else until it does not. In 2014, Russian cosmonaut Oleg Artemyev reported hearing sounds from outside the station during a spacewalk. This is technically impossible in the same way that all of the previous sounds should be technically impossible, and it requires the same kind of careful unpacking. Artemyev was outside the station in vacuum in a pressurized suit. His suit is its own sealed environment with its own fans, pumps, and communication systems. What he described was not coming from inside his suit. It was a vibration, a rhythmic pulsing that he felt in his gloves when they were in contact with the station's external handrails, and that transmitted into his body as a sound-like sensation. The station was conducting a vibration through its structure that traveled into the handrails and into the suit gloves and into the cosmonaut's bones. Bone conduction bypasses the eardrum entirely. The sound arrives directly in the inner ear through the skull. Engineers identified the most likely source as a gyroscope assembly inside the station, executing a scheduled desaturation maneuver. The timing matched, the frequency matched. The file was closed. What cannot be closed is the description Artemyev gave in a post-mission interview. He said the sensation was not mechanical. He said it felt rhythmic in the way breathing is rhythmic. Organic rather than engineered. He was careful to say he knew it had an explanation. He was also careful to say the explanation did not fully capture what it felt like from inside the suit. Gripping a handrail on the outside of the largest structure humans have ever put in orbit, with the Earth turning 250 miles below, and nothing else anywhere around him. That is the gap this entire subject lives in. The gap between the engineering file and the human experience. Everything described so far happened in low Earth orbit. Communication delays to the ISS are measured in fractions of a second. Mission control can hear what the crew hears almost in real time. A crew member who hears something unexplained can have a team of engineers analyzing the data within minutes. A crewed mission to Mars changes every single one of those parameters. At closest approach, Mars is roughly 55 million kilometers from Earth. A radio signal takes approximately 3 minutes to make the one-way trip. At its farthest, the delay stretches beyond 20 minutes each way. A crew member who hears something on a Mars transit vehicle at 3 in the morning cannot call mission control and have an answer before their coffee gets cold. They will have to wait 40 minutes minimum for a round-trip communication. More likely hours depending on the operational tempo. That 40-minute window is not an engineering problem. It is a psychological one. The human brain does not hold uncertainty well. It resolves it one way or another, usually by filling the gap with the most emotionally available explanation. In the dark, in a metal tube, 6 months from Earth, with no ability to get an immediate answer, an unexplained sound does not stay unexplained in the crew member's mind for 40 minutes. It becomes something. It becomes the answer their nervous system generates in the absence of a real one. NASA's Human Research Program has modeled this extensively. The findings consistently point to the same risk factor. Unexplained acoustic events in long-duration isolated environments contribute to elevated anxiety, sleep disruption, crew conflict, and in extreme cases, cognitive distortion. The research does not speculate about ghosts or the supernatural. It speculates about what happens to a highly trained, highly competent human being when their environment produces stimuli their training cannot resolve and their support network is 40 minutes away. The answer is that they remain functional. and they carry the unresolved sound with them for the rest of the mission. There is a set of records at NASA's Johnson Space Center that does not appear on the agency's public data portal. It is called the Crew Observations Anomaly Log, and it contains, among other things, every acoustic anomaly reported by ISS crews since 2000. The log is not classified. It is simply not formatted for public release and has never been the subject of a press release or a published paper. Researchers who have worked with elements of the data describe it as a rich, unanalyzed archive. Hundreds of individual reports spanning 25 years of continuous human occupation of a structure unlike anything ever built. Each entry is brief. Date, location, description, probable cause if assigned, status. Most entries have a probable cause. A meaningful fraction have a status that reads unresolved or no corroborating telemetry found. No corroborating telemetry found means the crew heard something that no instrument aboard the station registered. Not that it did not happen, not that it was imaginary, that whatever produced the sound either did not generate a signal that any installed sensor was measuring, or generated a signal too small to cross the logging threshold. Bones conduct sound. Walls transmit vibrations. Pressurized metal rings. Not all of those paths are monitored by telemetry. The human ear, properly calibrated by months aboard the station, may be the most sensitive acoustic instrument aboard, which means the unresolved entries in that log may represent real events that the station's instruments were too coarse to detect. Or they may represent the products of isolated human nervous systems doing what isolated human nervous systems do. Nobody knows which. And until someone does the analysis, the archive sits. NASA runs a course for flight crews called the Acoustic Anomaly Recognition Program. It is not listed by that name in any public document. It is embedded in the broader environmental systems training that all long-duration crew members complete before their first assignment. The substance of the training is straightforward. Crews are exposed to recordings of every documented acoustic event ever logged aboard the ISS. Thermal pops, impact signatures, mechanical resonance tones, coolant flow hiss, structural settle sounds. The goal is library building. When you hear something unexpected in orbit, you want to have already heard it on the ground so your brain can file it correctly instead of treating it as unknown. Former astronauts who describe this training consistently say the same thing. It works for about 80% of what you actually hear in orbit. The other 20% consists of combinations of factors, specific thermal gradients, specific orbital geometries, specific mechanical load conditions, that never occurred in exactly the same configuration when the recordings were made. Those combinations produce sounds the training did not prepare them for, and each crew member deals with those unrecognized sounds the same way. They stop what they are doing. They listen. They run through the mental checklist. They accept or reject each probable cause in sequence. They arrive at an explanation they can live with. The explanation they can live with is not always the explanation that is factually correct. It is the explanation that allows them to stop listening and go back to work. That distinction is not a criticism of the astronauts. It is a description of how human cognition manages uncertainty under operational pressure. You cannot spend the rest of a 6-month mission frozen in front of a wall trying to identify a sound you heard at 3 in the morning. At some point, you decide it was thermal contraction. You file it internally. You move on. The sound does not care what you decided. It keeps happening. The story of unexplained spacecraft sounds is not a ghost story. There are no ghosts. It is not a cover-up story. NASA is not hiding alien contact inside an anomaly log at Johnson Space Center. It is a story about the gap between the world we build and the world we inhabit. Human beings design spacecraft to the best of their ability. They instrument every system. They model every interaction. They brief every crew on every known failure mode. And then they send 4, 6, 10 human beings into an environment that produces stimuli no model fully predicted, and those human beings have to make sense of those stimuli in real time, with whatever cognitive tools evolution gave them. The unexplained sounds are not a failure of engineering. They are a reminder of the limits of modeling. The gap between the engineering file and the crew member's experience is not a bug. It is the honest description of what it means to be alive inside a machine. Every sound the station makes that no instrument logs, every vibration that travels through a glove into a cosmonaut's bones, every hiss that blends into background noise until the pressure readings change. These are the station communicating in a language the engineers have not fully transcribed yet. As we move toward longer missions, toward transit vehicles that will carry people for months through the absolute quiet between planets, that language becomes more important. The crews of those missions will hear things their training did not cover. They will hear things that mission control cannot immediately explain, and they will have to live with those sounds at a distance from home that no human being has ever lived at. The research that prepares them for that is being done now, quietly, in the same analog environments that have always been the closest thing to deep space available on Earth. But the archive of what has already been heard, 25 years of documented acoustic life aboard the most complex structure humans have ever occupied, is still waiting for someone to read it carefully. Every entry in that log is a data point. Every unresolved entry is a question. The questions are not about the supernatural. They are about the limit of what human engineering can anticipate about human experience. That limit is closer than the blueprints suggest. And in the silence between planets, it will be the most important thing any crew member ever has to manage. Scott Kelly flew 520 days in space across 4 missions. He holds the American record for single spaceflight duration. He has heard more of the station's sounds than almost any human being alive. In his memoir Endurance, he describes the station's acoustic environment in detail. He describes the sounds that surprised him even on his 4th mission, the ones that made him stop and listen even after years of documented experience. He does not describe them as frightening. He describes them as company. That word is the whole story. When you are alone in a metal shell above an atmosphere that cannot carry sound, the noises your ship makes are the only evidence that you are not in absolute silence. The unexplained ones are not the enemy. They are the most honest thing about the experience. Your machine is in an environment it was not built for. It is doing its best. And occasionally it says something that none of its designers thought to put in the manual. The astronauts who learn to hear that and not panic are the ones who come home functional. The ones who learn to hear it and ask careful questions are the ones who keep the rest of us safer. That is what this archive of sounds is in the end, not proof of anything strange. Proof that the gap between what we build and what we experience is real, measurable, and worth taking seriously. The next crew to hear something they cannot explain will be farther from home than any of the ones before them, and they will be listening to a wall that learned to talk from every crew that came before. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.